Madam President and Senators, good afternoon. See how the world marks the manner of your bearing. This third line in our national anthem reminds us Bahamians that the world is taking note of how we are carrying out our responsibilities as nation builders. What are we noted for around the world? What vision has been cast for us as we are evolving and has developed over the past 50 years? In every generation, we must determine what are our duties and responsibilities and how they will impact our Bahama land today and in the years to come. And it is important for each of you to seek to do all you can with all your might, even when some things demand that you be very courageous. Ezra chapter 10, verse 4 states, "Arise, for it is your task, and we are with you. Be strong and do it." As leaders and senators, what burdens, responsibilities, and opportunities are you tasked with that are challenging for you, but are necessary as we continue to evolve and develop as a nation? Are you aware of the far-reaching implications of your actions and decisions? And do you know that even when you have done your best, there can be internal and external forces that make assumptions about you without seeking all the information? Galatians 6 and 9 states, "And let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up." This third line in the national anthem reminds us, firstly, that no one, not even a country, lives without being noticed by others. We would like at times to be invisible or to fly below the radar, but it is not possible. The world is watching. Secondly, the world is always making a judgment call. At times we wish that we could just exist without persons having their say. But both locally and internationally, persons evaluate and comment on us, our choices, our decisions, our traditions, etc. This can be added stress. But we must always be true to who we are and what we feel called by God to be as a people and as a country. The last two lines in "Lift Every Voice and Sing" by James Weldon Johnson can serve to encourage you. "Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land." Deuteronomy 31 and 6, I read this verse to you from the Good News translation. "Keep going, no matter what other people say. Your one true companion throughout life is God, and he will never abandon you." Let us pray. Dear Lord, we give you thanks for the placement of our country in the world, both geographically and on the world stage. We give you thanks for her legacy, her history, and for the future that is yet unfolding. We pray that all legislators and leaders everywhere in our Bahamas will conduct themselves in a manner that will honor you and bring honor to our country. Put your hand of protection over our senators and their families. Lead, guide them in your way, and fill them with all the wisdom that they will need. In the precious name of Jesus we pray. Please join in the prayer of our Lord. Our Father, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
to, I think maybe you need to get another chair and sit over there. Leave that in the Hmm? Hmm? Mm-mm. I can tell everybody right. Yeah, but we just let me get through this. You just let me work through it. Good afternoon, Senators. Today, the 25th day of April, 2023, afternoon session. I'd like to thank Madam Chaplain for your timely devotion as always. May God continue to bless you as you minister to others, including the senators. Adoption of minutes.
Good afternoon, Madam President. Madam President, I move that the minutes of the session of the Senate held on Thursday, 23rd March 2023 be adopted.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of March 2023 be adopted. As many as in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The minutes of the 23rd of March 2023 are adopted. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign, swearing in of new senators, communications by the President, messages from the Governor General, messages from the House of Assembly,
Bahamas, number 27. Message to the Honorable the President and the Honorable members of the Senate from the Speaker and representatives of the Honorable House of Assembly. The House of Assembly acquaints the Honorable the Senate that they have passed the following bills and desire the consent of that Honorable Chamber, namely, a bill for an act to expand the practice of nursing and midwifery, to continue the Nursing Council of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, to provide for the training, regulation, registration, and licensing of registered nurses, midwives, and advanced practice nurses, to provide for the training, regulation, enrollment, and licensing of licensed practical nurses, to provide for the regulation of nurse interns, to provide for the regulation of unlicensed assistant personnel, to provide for the regulation, registration, and licensing of nursing agencies, to repeal the Nurses and Midwives Act 1971, and for connected purposes. A bill for an act to repeal and replace the Law Reform and Revision Act, to modernize the law for reforming, revising, and consolidating the laws of the Bahamas, and for connected purposes. House of Assembly, Nassau, 19th April 2023, Patricia DeVoe, Speaker. Bahamas, number 28. Message to the Honorable the President and Honorable members of the Senate from the Speaker and representatives of the Honorable House of Assembly. The House of Assembly acquaints the Honorable the Senate that they have passed the following bill and desire the consent of that Honorable Chamber, namely, a bill for an act to amend the Central Bank of the Bahamas Act. House of Assembly, Nassau, 24th April, 2023, Patricia DeVoe, Speaker.
laying of documents by ministers.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I beg leave to lay on the table of the Senate copies of the following rules. the value-added tax supply of real property general rules 2023, and the Supreme Court Civil Procedure Amendment Rules 2023.
Order the document be brought up. Order the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents.
Yes, Madam President. Madam President, I beg leave to lay on the table of the Senate copies of the following regulations: the Price Control General Amendment Number 2, Regulations 2023, and the Price Control General Amendment Number 3, Regulations 2023.
Order the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents.
Yes, Madam President. Madam President, I beg leave to lay on the table of the Senate a copy of the Supreme Court Civil Procedure Rules appointed day notice 20, Supreme Court Civil Procedure Rules 2022, appointed day notice 2023, and the public holidays Easter Monday 2023, opening of shops notice 2023.
Order the document be brought up. Order the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents.
Yes, Madam President, and finally, I beg leave to lay on the table of the Senate a copy of the Public Debt Management Bahamas Registered Stock Number 1, 2024, and 2025 Directions 2023.
Order the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers.
And Madam President.
Communications by ministers. Communications by senators. Questions. Answers to questions. Presentations of petitions. Appointment of select committees. Reports of committees. First reading.
Madam President, I have a brief report from the Library Committee, if you would allow. Good afternoon, Madam President.
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Eureka Hepburn Forbes.
Good afternoon, Madam President. The Library Committee met March 23rd, 2023, and discussed several issues that committee would like to address, in particular in raising the awareness of the presence of senators. In particular, the Library Committee would ask that all senators present persons of the committees with their bios, as we are working to get persons, all the senators, on the government website. We'd like to have a Senate page on bahamas.gov, and so we're formally making that request. We have started that procedure, and we just wanted it on record. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Hepburn Forbes, for your report from the Library Committee. First reading of bills.
Madam President, there were 3 bills that were debated that were read for the first time here in the Senate. They were debated in that other place, and amendments were made. We now have copies of the compounded bills, and we would like at this time to withdraw the bills that had been laid and replace them with the compounded bills that have come up from the House of Assembly, if we can get the concurrence of the side opposite.
Senator Henfield.
No
Chair
obje-
recognizes.
No objection.
Thank you, Senator Henfield. Thank you for your cooperation.
So thank you very much, Senator Henfield, for your concurrence, and Madam President. And so the 3 bills are firstly, the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill 2023, I would like to withdraw and replace, as well as the Law Reform and Revision Bill 2022, and the Nurses and Midwives Bill 2023. And so I so move.
Seconder.
Second.
Hmm?
So I'll move them individually for the sake of good order, Madam President. So in first reading of the bill.
First reading of bills.
Yes, so Madam President, thank you very much I will just move each in the individually. So I move for first reading of the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill 2023.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
Order the bill be brought up. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a first time and tabled. A bill for an act to amend the Central Bank of the Bahamas Act. As many as in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion is carried. Order the document be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Central Bank of the Bahamas Act.
For the first reading of bills,
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the Law Reform and Revision Bill 2022.
is there a seconder? Order the bill be brought up. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a first time and tabled. A bill for an act to repeal and replace the Law Reform and Revision Act and to modernize the law for the reforming, revising, and consolidating the laws of the Bahamas and for connected purposes. As many as in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The motion is carried. Or the document be read for a first time.
A bill for an act to repeal and replace the Law, Reform, and Revision Act and to modernize the law for reforming, revising, and consolidating the laws of the Bahamas and for connected purposes.
For the first reading of bills,
Thank you, Madam President. And finally, Madam President, I wish to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to expand the practice of nursing and midwifery, to continue the Nursing Council of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, to provide for the training, regulation, registration, and licensing of registered nurses, midwives, and advanced practice nurses, to provide for the training, regulation, enrollment, and licensing of licensed practical nurses, to provide for the regulation of nurse interns, to provide for the regulation of unlicensed assistive personnel, to provide for the regulation, registration, and licensing of nursing agencies, and to repeal the Nurses and Midwives Act 1971 and for connected purposes.
is there a seconder?
Second.
Or the document be brought up? It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a first time and tabled. A bill for an act to expand the practice of nursing and midwifery, to continue the Nursing Council of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, to provide for the training, regulation, registration, and licensing of registered nurses, midwives, and advanced practice nurses, to provide for the training, regulation, enrollment, and licensing of licensed practical nurses, to provide for the regulation of nurses interns, to provide for the regulation of unlicensed assistive personnel, to provide for the regulation, registration, and licensing of nursing agencies, to repeal the Nurses and Midwives Act 1971 and for connected purposes. As many as in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion is carried. Order that the document be read for a first time.
A bill for an act to expand the practice of nursing and midwifery, to continue the Nursing Council of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, to provide for the training, regulation, registration, and licensing of registered nurses, midwives, and advanced practice nurses, to provide for the training, regulation, enrollment, and licensing of licensed practical nurses, to provide for the regulation of nurse interns, to provide for the regulation of unlicensed assistive personnel, to provide for the regulation, registration, and licensing of nursing agencies, to repeal the Nurses and Midwives Act 1971 and for connected purposes.
Further first reading of bills? Second reading of bills? The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Ryan Pinder.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise to move for the second reading of a bill for an act to repeal and replace the Law Reform and Revision Act and to modernize the law for reforming, revising, and consolidating the laws of the Bahamas for connected purposes. The bill we debate today is intended to modernize the function of the Law Reform and Revision Commission while providing additional flexibility in the operation of the Commission. I am pleased, Madam President, to speak on the Law Reform and Revision Bill, and particularly to clear up some of the comments made by a few of the speakers during the debate in the lower house last week. Madam President, as an attorney at law and as the Attorney General with responsibility for law reform and the Revision Commission, I fully understand and have an appreciation for the need to modernize the law for reforming, revising, and consolidating the laws. In short, Madam President, law revision is the process of updating the law without changing its substance. It is aimed at presenting the law in its correct form, which facilitates access to and the administration of justice, law enforcement, legal education, and research. The general function of law reform is to keep under review the laws of the Bahamas with a view to modernizing their systemic development and reform. Law reform includes the work on major legislative projects of the country. The Commission is also responsible for the drafting of legislative amendments from time to time. All of these functions, Madam President, are the backbone of the legislative arm of the government or the Parliament. Without the laws, we wouldn't be here. The law is constantly changing and evolving. Having practiced in the private practice as an attorney for 22 years, yes, I'm that old, I can attest to the amount of time spent trying to determine what the current state of law is at any point in time. The reason for this, Madam President, is because when a piece of legislation has been amended several times, one has to obtain copies of all of the amendments made to that legislation. Then we struggle to place or read these amendments into the principal piece of legislation in order to get a full understanding of the law, which, Madam President, can be very time-consuming and frustrating, to say the least. And at times, Madam President, you have an amendment to a law that puts something in place, and then a subsequent amendment of the law that takes the same thing out again. So you have to follow systemically the amendments that are made one by one by one. The recent constant amendment of the emergency power orders is a fine example of this, Madam President. At any given time, there was uncertainty as to what the current state of the law was. I remember, Madam President, subsistence fishing. I'm a fisherman, Madam President, having had a record-breaking tuna last week. And I would have to read all of these orders to see if I was allowed to go fishing during COVID lockdowns. You would think, you're in a boat all by yourself. Where's the COVID? Madam President, similarly, the financial legislation is another fine example. Each year during the budget exercise, the VAT Act, the Stamp Act, the Real Property Tax Act, Customs Management Act, the Tariff Act, The Business License Act are all amended every year at budget time. Imagine having to follow those amendments from one year to the next to provide proper advice to your clients. Madam President, if these acts are not revised from time to time and consolidated, it would be impossible for a practitioner and the ordinary layperson, to say the least, to determine what the current law is. And so, Madam President, hence the need for law revision exercises. It is for this reason, Madam President, that when certain bills are brought to Parliament, that a repeal and replace may be preferred, even if they are not voluminous amendments contained therein. It makes it easier for the reader to determine the current state of the law, rather than put the reader through the hassle of incorporating so many amendments after the passage of what some may be bulky amendments. This bill, Madam President, therefore seeks to repeal and replace the current law reform and revision bill. The bill, Madam President, impacts inter alia the Constitution, appointment and functions of the Commission itself. The Commission, as mentioned, is responsible for the broad legislative drafting exercise of the government. Since I took office in 2021, Madam President, I have been actively pursuing the engagement of additional legislative drafters, even offering employment to some of my colleagues on the other side. The success, Madam President, of any government is dependent upon the ability to have necessary legislation drafted effectively and, in some cases, swiftly. Legislative drafting is an extremely specialized area of the law. Legislative draftsmen are in demand globally, as there are persons who have responsibilities for preparing bills for debate in Parliament and for preparing the subsidiary legislation for execution by ministers. All of the regulations, all of the rules, all of the various orders that we hear read by my colleague from time to time, all of these originate out of the Law Reform Commission. A trained legislative drafter possesses a highly specialized skill. As such, when we recruit legislative drafters, our government encourages all of our drafters to seek a master's degree in legislative drafting, and we even voluntarily pay towards that master's degree. A legislative drafter often works under heavy demand and stressful circumstances. Currently, Madam President, the present number of legislative drafters in the Bahamas is woefully inadequate for the demands of the government. At present, the Law Reform Commission has one commissioner, 4 trained draftsmen, and 1 trainee draftsman, and that's it. There's one other legislative draftsman that resides in the Office of the Attorney General, and that's all we have as a country for the legislative drafting that we do from time to time. And all of these laws and bills you see come through this place are done by that small subset of attorneys. The staff of the Commission will soon be complemented by 4 additional persons to carry out the work of the Commission and the mandate of the government more effectively. The qualifications for appointment in the bill has been broadened. Historically, a person was eligible for appointment as a commissioner if he appeared to the Governor General to be suitably qualified by the holding or having held judicial office, by experience as a legal practitioner, or as a teacher of law in a university. While the current law provides for a commissioner to be someone with legal training, Madam President, the complexities of legislation these days sometimes require expertise in other areas. I should point out, Madam President, that a person appointed as a commissioner does not necessarily have to be a legislative drafter, but they will have to work along with legislative drafters, who would be lawyers, in the preparation of the legislation. I am confident, Madam President, that the selection of a person to be commissioner would be someone who, in the opinion of the Prime Minister, is by reason of their special qualifications, training, or experience, whether that be legal or otherwise, would be suitable for such appointment and in accordance with Clause 4 of the bill. And that person would not just be a political appointment, as some in that other place would seem to suggest. I should also mention, Madam President, that the new qualification provision is aligned with regional counterparts such as the Cayman Islands. The constitution of the Commission has been reduced from a maximum of 5 persons to 3 people, Madam President, to preserve the exclusivity of the post of Commissioner, with limited persons performing oversight functions of such an important public task. The rationale is to structure the Commission with 3 commissioners, each with a different focus, thereby trying to cover all areas of the law at the same time. That's what the current plan is for the Law Reform and Revision Commission. It is also important to recognize a new provision in this bill. Section 5 provides where a public officer holding a pensionable office under the government of the Bahamas is appointed as a commissioner, his service shall be deemed continuous and reckoned as if it were service in a public office. Madam President, this is vital to attract suitable persons who may be civil servants to the post of commissioner. This broadens the area of expertise to perform the functions of the Commission, just as I have discussed, trying to cover all areas of the law while formulating your laws and initiating major legislative reform projects. Madam President, you will note from Clause 11 of the bill, 1 commissioner will be designated to have responsibility for law revision. This is an important nuance, Madam President. The need for this is that the law revision in itself is a tumultuous task. With the demands of legislation and law reform, law revision historically has not had the direct focus which it requires. And lawyers can tell you that. The last revision exercise of our laws was in 2016. And the publication of that revision is still outstanding. So that should tell you where the revision exercise of our laws lies. And I'm sure the practitioners around this table will say the same thing. Under the present act, Madam President, I acknowledge that it is a duty of the Commission to prepare a revised edition of the statute law. But the reality is there just wasn't an adequate number of trained persons to carry out this function over the years. So those who may have been trying to focus on revision would have to abandon the revision exercise to do consequential amendments to support the legislature of the country. Hence my continued efforts to actively seek and engage suitably trained persons to complement the staff at the Law Reform Commission. And I again, Madam President, extend the invitation and the olive branch across to the other side. What do you want? I got him right here. Madam President, I have heard the cries of legal practitioners, members of the judiciary, and everyday users of the law to focus more on consolidation and law revision. Upon the passage of this bill, Madam President, is anticipated to have the Bahamas laws online, modernized and updated to show the laws which are updated. Not only that, Madam President, they will be an official gazetted version of the law. So you're not taking a chance. You go on laws online, there's a big disclaimer up at the top. This is just for your use. Do not rely on it. It may not be updated. You may be committing malpractice. The whole thing, right? The intention is to fix that. We are in the digital age. And we should not be there printing books and books and binders and binders and paper. Look at those books behind you. Look at all those books behind you. Those haven't been revised since 2016. They're useless. They're useless. The bill, Madam President, also seeks to impose additional obligations on the Commission. In particular, to prepare background papers on proposed law reform projects, detailing the history and the scope of the project, the existing legislation or process, the person consulting, the sources referred to, and other things, and to maintain electronic databases and records of the above, of what I've just referred. This is important, Madam President, because it gives a context to major reform projects that the government may be undertaking, and provide the proper transparency that is required and expected when you're doing major changes to the law. I'll give you a quick example. We have a Real Property Reform Commission. That commission is responsible for laying a framework for registered land. The concept of registered land in the Bahamas is foreign. We don't have it. It is a vexing problem. Any major change would have to be properly explained to the Bahamian public and practitioners on why. Now, we believe it is a good thing to do, but again, it is a foreign concept. This will now require the commissioner who is working on that major reform project to create these reports on who they consulted, how they consulted, what advice they were given, how it changes existing law, to help with the transparency of major reform changes in the Bahamas. And I think that's only going to be helpful for us modernizing our legislation and certain important policy areas that the government seeks to pursue. So one can see, Madam President, that although the qualifications for appointment have been broadened, the technical and arduous functions and obligations imposed upon a commissioner under this bill are such that only persons with requisite qualifications, training, and experience would be suitable for appointment under the Act. Hence, Madam President, the concern for broadening these qualifications in that other place clearly must be dispelled. Pure political mischief, Madam President. The bill also sets out parameters and the legal authority for the maintenance of electronic databases and records as set forth in Section 12 of the bill. Legal practitioners would remember the days, as I said, of having legislation in books, subsidiary legislation in books, collecting dust on your bookshelf. This practice, although suiting its purpose in years gone by, in today's environment has lost some of its utility. Now, don't tell my father I said that, because he still goes to the books. This bill sets out the legal authority to publish databases and revised editions electronically. Such electronic copies carrying necessary legal authority and not merely electronic reprints. Although it seems like a minor distinction, Madam President, this is an important reform to ensure constant, legally recognized legislative updates available on a real-time basis, not only to legal practitioners, but also to the general public. And I would advise, Madam President, on the passages of this bill, a new law revision exercise is underway. We have identified the consultant. We are identifying the necessary publisher. And so what you do in a law revision exercise is you take all the laws, all the amendments, and you read them page by page by page. You would then cut out the amended provision, paste it into the master document, keep reading page by page by page, fixing discrepancies, incorporating the amendments, verifying no errors. All the laws in the Bahamas, all the regulations in the Bahamas, all the rules in the Bahamas, and then sending it off for a consolidated reprint that we now have electronically and constantly updated, because we will have a commissioner solely focused on law revision in the country. Madam President, as mentioned, the concept is to appoint more than one commissioner, and to do so to advance different components of legislative policy of the government. Our government, this new day government, is committed, therefore, to appointing one commissioner to focus on criminal justice reform, one commissioner to focus on civil and other major reform projects, and one commissioner to have the sole responsibility for law revision. This would be a first, Madam President, as historically there's usually only been one commissioner. And if you don't tell the secret, in certain instances, no commissioners. And so, as my fellow parliamentarian, the honorable member for the constituency of Pinewood pointed out in the lower house, the goal of this government is to have more technical persons to work with the commissioners as well, because you now have portfolios, for lack of a better word, and you have to fill those portfolios. I mentioned that our government intends on appointing a law reform commissioner with responsibility for criminal justice legislative reform. The appointment of another commissioner to focus on criminal justice legislative reform is in support of a promise made in our Blueprint for Change to assure the necessary reforms are executed for a safe Bahamas. The commissioner will particularly focus on keeping under review the laws of the Bahamas which directly relate to criminal matters in the country. The role would be to pioneer the modernization of our criminal laws, to ensure systemic development and reform, and recommend and prepare legislation to address any deficiencies or shortfalls in criminal legislation that might exist. This is an important element in the government's crime-fighting strategy, Madam President, because the laws have to be modern and they have to address the circumstances of the day. Madam President, before I close, I want to take a couple minutes to admonish that white man in the other place. That would be the member for St. Anne's, for his decisive attitude, divisive attitude, and dismissive attitude toward his legislative responsibilities in relation to this bill. His ignorance can be blamed on being a rookie parliamentarian. But as a legal practitioner, he should be ashamed of posture he had in that place.
Senator Pinder, we have a
what?
Out of order.
point of order. What is your point of order, please?
The rules of this place clearly prohibits disparaging words spoken about any member of any parliament of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, be it this place or the other.
What's the word spoken?
You didn't hear anything he said. You found it hard.
I'm asking you a question.
Well,
You stood on a
Madam-
point of order. It's
Madam-
not my point of order.
Madam President,
Can you
if you
please
didn't hear
state
anything he
your
said
point of
disparaging,
order?
I think I can take my seat. But
Can
but
you
know,
please state your point of order?
He called the fellow very disparagingly, even though he's a white man. I guess that's why it wouldn't appear disparaging to him, right? That white man in that other place. Very disparagingly.
Isn't
Right?
it that?
Very disparagingly. And then he goes on with some more derogatory commentary concerning
So-
the member of parliament for St. Anne's.
What is your precise point of order that
My
you
point of
want?
order is this member, who is the Attorney General of the Bahamas, who ought to know better, should not be speaking disparagingly about his colleagues in either House of Parliament. That is my comment. That is my point of order.
Thank you for that
Thank
intervention.
you, Senator Handfield.
Madam President, may I continue?
Senator Ryan Pinder. Senator Handfield, point of order is that you mentioned some disparaging remarks with respect to
That was his
a
last
member
name,
from
Madam
another
President.
place?
His last name is White. His last name is White. I even have it capitalized in my speech. His last name is White.
Yeah. So as to not.
He would call me that Pinder man over here. That's a disparaging comment?
Yeah, I agree that that's his last name, Senator Pinder. I think that is very well known. However, I think it's better if we follow the normal procedure of referring to the person as the member in the other place.
Noted. I'll
I
continue
think
in
that
vein.
that's
Thank you, Madam President.
a broader description.
No problem.
And that way, we'll all stay out of trouble. Thank you.
No problem.
Can you please,
So
the chair
my-
recognizes, can you
Yeah,
please
so
proceed,
might I-
Senator Pinder?
I'll start that
Thank you.
paragraph over again then. Before,
Have to?
no, I do. Yes, because it's a full paragraph.
Go ahead.
Before I close, Madam President, I would like to admonish that man in the other place representing the St. Anne's constituency, for his dismissive attitude towards his legislative responsibilities in relation to this bill. His ignorance can be blamed on being a rookie parliamentarian, but as a legal practitioner, he should be ashamed of the posture in which he took. And as the shadow minister for legal affairs, he should apologize to the current members of the Law Reform and Revision Commission who have worked hard on this bill. They believe it is an important piece of legislation for the modernization of their department, a department, if God help us, he ever becomes Attorney General, he would have the portfolio responsibility to oversee. Madam President, he owes the hardworking people of the Commission an apology for what he had to say. I, for one, am proud of all of the attorneys and the staff in the Commission. It is not an easy job. Some may say it isn't a glamorous job, but they are some of the smartest and hardest working people that I know. Our government has an aggressive legislative agenda, and at times an urgent legislative agenda. And they have always been up to the task without complaint. I want to thank Dame Anita Allen for her leadership as the commissioner. I also want to thank Director Tina Roy for her constant attention and dedication to perfection in legislative drafting. To all of the attorneys and staff that support the efforts of the Commission, you are valued and you are greatly appreciated to this administration. Madam President, without them, the functions of this Parliament would not happen. It wouldn't happen. And remember, there are one commissioner, 4 legislative drafters, 1 trainee, and 1 legislative drafter in OAG. 6 people, 6 attorneys support that place, support this place, and support all of the ministries who are issuing rules and regulations to define the legal framework of this country. Madam President, with those words, I move for the second reading of a bill for an act to repeal and replace the Law Reform and Revision Act and to modernize the law for reforming, revising, and consolidating the laws of the Bahamas and for connected purposes. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pinder, for your contribution. Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Barry Griffin.
Madam President, it's hard to follow the riveting oratory skills of our Attorney General, but I'll try. Madam President, there's a lot for me to be thankful for in this 50th year of our independence, and there's a lot for our country to be thankful for. I personally thank Almighty God for the gift of life and his many blessings in my life, and as a people, we are thankful to live in a liberal democracy where our collective voices are heard, a country that continues to punch above its weight in the world, and a country that even in the worst of times, we can say that we've been spared war, civil unrest, famine, drought, and so many other plagues and afflictions our brothers and sisters across the world cannot say they have spared. Madam President, even with all that's happening around us, we must be thankful to Almighty God. I continue to thank the Prime Minister for entrusting me to be a voice for this administration in this place, and I thank the Progressive Liberal Party, the leadership, the stalwarts, and all members who continue to support each and every one of us senators in this place. As a young man who is fortunate enough to sit at this table during these times, I am cognizant that I represent and speak on behalf of a big and large chunk of our population. Over 56% of our population are people 35 years and younger, and over 60% of our population are people 40 years and younger. As most people in this category are not eligible to vote, As the young population is underrepresented in this place and many other places of influence, I am fully aware that I must use my voice to address not only the concerns of young people, but all those who depend on us to pass legislation now will affect the future of the Bahamas. Over the last 2 weeks, Madam President, our country has been rocked by the news of some very tragic deaths. We note the death of a mother and her young daughter. Please permit me, Madam President, to publicly convey my condolences to the family of Allison and Trevor Thompson. I was pained to learn the story of their tragic deaths. I am advised, Madam President, that Allison would have celebrated her 38th birthday on the day that her body was found, and that her daughter, a student of T.A. Thompson, wanted to be a teacher. This is a sad loss for our country. Madam President, please also permit me to express my most sincere condolences to the family of Tyrone Oliver and his brother, who were killed in a double homicide over the weekend. Tyrone was the father to a young daughter and a decorated boxer, and his brother was also the father to a young daughter and had intended to be married next month. Madam President, I have never personally met Tyrone, but he reached out to me on social media to congratulate me on this position and to offer his encouragement. I also expressed my congratulations to him on his stellar boxing career and offered my support. In fact, under 2 weeks ago, he let me know via social media that he was planning a boxing match, and I let him know that I would be honored to attend to watch him in action and to support him. So, Madam President, to hear the news of his death struck me. While I didn't know him personally, his passion for boxing was clear, and his love of country was even more apparent. Violence is never the right answer. Families have been broken because of these tragedies. A nation mourns because of these tragedies. The life of a promising future teacher has been snuffed out. A 14-year-old young boy is without his mother and sister, and the life of a promising young athlete gone. 2 young girls are now without their fathers. Madam President, I pray that each of their souls rest in peace. Madam President, I rise to second the debate on the Law Reform and Revision Bill 2022. The purpose of the Law Reform and Revision Bill is to repeal and replace the Law Reform and Revision Act, Chapter 3, and to modernize the law for reforming, revising, and consolidating the laws of the Bahamas and for connected purposes. It is well recognized that existing laws and the kind of legislation that a country enacts contributes to the betterment or to the gradual destruction of our democracy and freedoms of our citizens. One of the remarkable traits of our country is the fact that we are a sovereign nation, a free people, and that by and large, we respect the rule of law. Millions of tourists flock to our shores each year, and thousands of foreign nationals call this place home, in part because the Bahamas is a nation of laws and a nation of law-abiding citizens. They recognize, and we too recognize, that no place is perfect, and that our people are not perfect. There will always be those who seek to disobey the law, which is why we must always ensure that our laws speak to the times that we live in. Madam President, the bill before us today will bring about a new revision and consolidation exercise in relation to the laws of the Bahamas. Any legal practitioner or any Bahamian that has tried to make sense of the many amendments to any piece of legislation can tell you that we are overdue for this exercise. I remember when I was a pupil, one of the first things that the legal secretaries did at my law firm was to print me the pieces of legislation that I would most use in my practice. One of them being the Companies Act. Anybody who practices company law would know that that piece of legislation has gone over many revisions over the years. And so there I had a printed version of all the amendments together in one. As our AG would have said before, in this day and age, that shouldn't be. There should always be a consolidated version of all of our pieces of legislation that not only legal practitioners can access and understand, but that anyone from the general public can readily find online and be able to sift through. Madam President, the existing act that we seek to replace today was assented on the 12th of September 1975. while this act has seen some revision over the years, we can all agree that much has changed since 1975. The bill before us updates the administration of law revision, such as staffing and management, as well as the legal procedures to be employed by the Law Reform and Revision Commission. I am sure Bahamians are familiar with the revisions of the Constitution that have occurred in recent history by various constitution commissions that have resulted in referenda on citizenship, the judiciary, etc. This entity conducts the same type of work, except not on the Constitution, but on Bahamian statute law. Madam President, an integral step in modernizing the Commission's mandate is the proper appointment of the Revision Commissioner. The law presently allows for a Reform Commissioner. However, the time-consuming nature of a revision exercise requires an experienced draftsman knowledgeable in the process of revision to focus on and oversee the same. This bill appoints a specific revision commissioner solely for the purpose of conducting and managing a revision and consolidation exercise. The appointment of such a commissioner will ensure that the laws of the country remain updated and consolidated despite the enactment of new legislation or new amendments to a particular piece of legislation. Madam President, Section 11 of the bill provides for the appointment of the Revision Commissioner to be designated by the Governor General pursuant to Section 5 and to have responsibility for preparing and publishing a revised edition where such is required, causing the incorporation and consolidation of amendments into existing law, the revised edition, and performing such other duties are provided for in the legislation. Madam President, I can hear the quiet cheers of lawyers from across the jurisdiction. Don't be so quiet, lawyers. Madam President, Section 6 of the bill sets out the details of the functions and powers of the Commission. To elaborate on just a few, it shall be the duty of the Commission to keep under review all laws applicable to the Bahamas with a view to its systematic development and reform, including in particular the codification of such law, the elimination of anomalies, the repeal of obsolete and unnecessary enactments, and generally the simplification and modernization of the law. Section 6.2 goes on to say, the Commission shall receive and consider any recommendations or proposals for the reform of the law which may be made to the Commission by the Attorney General, public officials, holders of judicial office, attorneys at law, members of the general public. Madam President, we live in unprecedented times. Our rapidly growing population and economy and the rapid pace of change in the world around us dictates that we must be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. The Commission must be able to focus on immigration reform and the reform of laws in relation to family law and domestic violence. The Commission must focus on revising the Law of Property Act and Quieting Titles Act while also addressing the concerns of the protection of victims of violence, witnesses in criminal matters, and whistleblowers in civil matters. In short, the Commission must be ready to tackle a myriad of issues across the spectrum of law and governance. Madam President, the Bahamas requires sound and relevant laws to cope with change, progress, and development. The Law Reform and Revision Bill 2022 will greatly assist in modernizing the law for reforming, revising, and consolidating the laws of the Bahamas. The functions and responsibilities of the Reform and Revision Commission have been clearly defined, and our country will be positively served by the work of the Commission. Part 3 of the bill provides for the rectification and correction of errors, consolidation of amendments, and reprint of laws. Madam President, this is important. If any error in a law comes to the attention of the Commissioner during a law revision exercise, if he or she is of the view that the error is a minor one, he or she may rectify the error. If the error is a significant one, he or she may advise the Attorney General of the error, and the Attorney General shall, by order, rectify the error. And this is an important one, Madam President. As you are aware, much of our time here in this place has been spent rectifying the minor and significant errors of the last administration. This bill provides a more streamlined and efficient mechanism for seeing that errors are corrected. But, Madam President, I want to be clear. Nothing in this bill empowers the Commissioner to change the substance or the essence of any law passed in this place or that other place. This is stated explicitly in Section 22(3), which states, "Nothing in this act shall empower the Commissioner to make any alteration or amendment in the substance or otherwise affecting the meaning of any law or provision of any law." Section 23(1) instructs the Commissioner to draft a bill for tabling in this place and the other place should he find the need to alter the substance of any law. It reads, "Notwithstanding Section 22(3), if in any case it appears necessary to the Commissioner to alter the substance of any law, the Commissioner shall draft a bill setting out the alterations and amendments therein, and the bill shall be submitted to Parliament by the Attorney General for passage by both houses thereof." Madam President, this administration is sure to keep checks and balances and sure that any legislation that affects the Bahamian people is properly passed by both houses of Parliament. Madam President, I know that we are all in a rush to do some major things for this country. We know that change and transformation is needed now. It is my view that this change must be done the right way. Passing bills such as this might not be sexy, but it's important. There are things that any administration, no matter their politics, must undertake, and law revision is one of those things. Madam President, I am confident that the members opposite would support the Law Reform and Revision Bill 2022, which sets a strong framework that supports the work of the Commission to see that our laws remain modern and relevant to our times. Governance is a partnership between the administration of the day and the Bahamian people. This administration is about the business of managing the people's affairs prudently and with reverence for their confidence. It is our intention to leave this country in a far better state than we met it, and to uplift as many people as we can in doing so. So as we replace and modernize legislation, we understand that we are creating the framework on which the next generation will examine and judge our efforts. The role that we hold is an important one at such a pivotal time in our country's history. In closing, Madam President, we cannot and we should not deny our roles as legislators and administrators of government. Too many people are counting on us. Therefore, as we continue our march on the road to 50, it is with great pride that I fully support the Law Reform and Revision Bill. And one more thing, Madam President. I would just like to personally shout out every single young Bahamian athlete who participated in Carifta and made our nation proud. Special shout out goes out to Dior Ray Scott, Otto Lang, Shamar Bain, Laval Vo, Darvanique Dane, and Jonathan Rogers. You all make us so proud as a nation. And with that, Madam President, I proudly second this bill.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act to repeal and replace the Law Reform and Revision Act and to modernize the law for the reforming, revising, and consolidating the laws of the Bahamas and for connected purposes. As many, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Michaela Barnett Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam President, I rise to contribute to the debate on the Law Reform and Revision Bill. Madam President, before I begin the substantive part of my contribution, I would like to take the opportunity to offer, like my learned friend, congratulations to Team Bahamas for their performance in the pool, on the track, and on the field during this year's Carifta Championships. While, swim on, proud one. While it can sometimes be tempting to focus on the many areas we fall short and need improvement, it is equally important to celebrate our successes and talents. Team Bahamans demonstrated that we are a supremely talented nation, and I don't care what anyone says, we won Carifta. We have been an independent nation since 1973. We have our own constitution, which is the supreme law of the land, and our legislation flows from the principles outlined in the articles of our constitution. We still have active legislation that predates our independence. We have not sought to review these ancient pieces of legislation to reflect our own Bahamian realities. I have said in this honorable place before that our legislation and our legislative priorities are an indicator of which matters are important and have been important to our executive, the Cabinet of the Bahamas. Ideally, of course, the Cabinet is made up of members of Parliament, and it should reflect the matters which are important to the people of the Bahamas. But naturally, governments have priorities. We pass, as a matter of priority, financial legislation for two reasons. One, the state of the economy of the Bahamas and our ability to collect revenue is important. And two, our financial services industry must continue to be on the cutting edge. But Madam President, money isn't everything. In order to make a kayak go straight in the water, you have to paddle evenly on both sides. And as legislators, we have not paddled evenly. I've looked at legislation that has passed in the last 10 years, and over 50% of that legislation is finance related. We have not made it a priority to review and revise legislation that deals with the social fabric of our community. The Minister of State for Legal Affairs gave two good examples: the law that deals with divorce and the law that deals with maintenance and access to children. Divorces make up 40% of civil matters before the court, yet we're still using the most archaic of legislation. It is 144 years old, and the last time it was amended was in 1991. So if Senator Griffin thinks that much has happened since 1975, imagine 1879. There have been transformative changes in case law since then, but our legislation remains behind the times and, quite frankly, disadvantages husbands and wives. There's a school of thought our archaic divorce laws have contributed to the prevalence of gender-based violence. Children who have been raised in toxic homes where persons remain married because it is too difficult to get a divorce often repeat toxic behavior. The breakdown of a marriage is tragic. We add insult to injury when parties are forced to characterize the reason for the breakdown into one of 5 categories. And then you have to recall one of the most heartbreaking experiences in a courtroom full of strangers. Grounds for divorce, like desertion, cruelty, and adultery, fuel a blame game that can last for years. A move towards no-fault divorces in the Bahamas is long overdue. And when there are minor children that must be co-parented, adding already wounded egos benefits no one. Unfortunately, marriages break down. The court's paramount interest is the interest of the minor children, and then we need to focus less on who's to blame and more on how we can enable parties to move forward and co-parent, which includes having access to children and financially providing for those children in a meaningful way. And how can we talk about the importance of fathers in their children's lives if we continue to ignore the unfortunate lacuna in our law, which prevents a father from making an application to have to access his child without a mother first making the application for his financial contribution? In 1992, we signed a convention to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women. On the rights against women, we agreed. We agreed to pursue by all appropriate means and without delay a policy of eliminating discrimination against women. It has been over 30 years, and we have moved at a snail's pace. To quote an international female activist, we cannot succeed when half of us are held back. And Madam President, there are those who ask, how are women being held back? They say, y'all running everything now. Women run banks, women run insurance companies, women run Atlantis, women run the public service. How can we say that women are held back? The answer is this. If you think your wife does not have the right to say no to sex, you're holding us back. If you don't think that there is an immediate need for legislation that addresses violence against women, you are holding us back. If we cannot pass on our citizenship to our children, regardless of our marital status or where we happen to give birth, you are holding us back. When we have the courage to step forward and tell our story, and you choose to undermine us rather than support us, you are holding us back. We, and I'm deliberately saying we, because no matter what color pom-pom we wave, as citizens, and particularly as women, who, by the way, make up the majority of the voting bloc, we must call on this Davis, Cooper, Hannah Martin, Wilshcombe team to bring legislation which protects women. After all, the Blueprint for Change said that the Progressive Liberal Party was committed to eliminating all forms of discrimination against men and women. I've also spoken about the need for more particularized sentencing guidelines. The Bahamas does not have a formal sentencing guidelines document. Other Caribbean jurisdictions, like Jamaica, Cayman, and those in the Eastern Caribbean do. In 2020, England enacted comprehensive sentencing legislation in the Sentencing Act 2020. Sentencing guidelines are comprehensive documents that provide judges with structured guidance on sentencing. It sets out the factors to be taken into consideration and the sentence discount that should be given without completely removing the court's discretion. It is my view that sentencing practices, particularly those related to sexual offenses, are a reflection of archaic views regarding the seriousness of sexual offenses. But thankfully, those attitudes have changed. But the court's hands remain tied because they must make sentences within the parameters of previously granted sentences. And then there are laws with relation to property and the transfer of property. The Conveyancing and Law of Property Act, which governs the acquisition of land in the Bahamas, was enacted in 1909. 1909. That's 114 years ago. We are home to some of the most beautiful pieces of land in the world. We have families who have lived on and worked the same piece of land for generations, but they have been unable to truly pass on that generational wealth, that generational asset, because they have no legal title, better known as land papers, to pass it on. Land is wealth. Andrew Carnegie said that 90% of millionaires become millionaires by owning land. Developing legislation to regularize and legalize the occupation of generational land in the Bahamas, and particularly on the Family Islands, would be a mammoth undertaking, but it would bring financial empowerment to hundreds of Bahamian families. This exercise, along with moving to a registered land system, would give power to and provide invaluable certainty to landowners. Over 10 years ago, a Free National Movement administration circulated for consultation draft legislation to deal with these vexatious issues. Sadly, the fear of change can be louder than the will to make a difference, and these draft bills were met with opposition without a solution. We cannot let the fear of failure and uncharted territory deter us from resolving matters which adversely those impacted by our laws. This administration rode a wave into office by promising a compassionate social agenda. We know that in PLP language, that means more contracts and handouts. But remedying the vexing problem of formalizing ownership for generational land would benefit many Bahamians, particularly those on the family islands. We can create multi-generational wealth and development in the family islands by more than just foreign-owned anchor projects. Madam President, as an attorney that comes into regular contact with the statute laws of the Bahamas, I could tell you about the myriad of ancient laws that hopefully no longer reflect the kind of country that we are. Madam President, I support this bill, not because it is groundbreaking or even necessary, but because it is almost identical to the older legislation that is being repealed. I have one recommendation, and that is that Section 4.1 be amended so that at least one of the members of the Law Reform Commission has the necessary legal background as outlined in Section 3.2 of the current Act. As the AG said, drafting is a specialized skill. This debate has given me the opportunity to publicly address the need for law reform of non-financial legislation, and to that I am grateful. As we hold this administration's feet to the fire, I cannot say, as we hold this administration's feet to the fire, I cannot close without saying that I look forward to the implementation of the Freedom of Information Act, an Integrity Commission Act, an Ombudsman Bill, a new Public Disclosure Act, Anti-Corruption Act, Campaign Finance Reform, Code of Conduct, Whistleblower Act, and Electoral Reform Act, as promised in the Blueprint for Change. Our laws are a reflection of who we are and what matters to us. Let us, through law, demonstrate that we are not stagnant and that we are dedicated to moving our beloved Bahama land forward, upward, and together. May God continue to bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. This is broken.
Thank you for your contribution, Senator. As many, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Darren Pickstock.
Madam President, I rise in this place to contribute to the Law Reform and Revision Bill of 2022. Madam President, before I dive into my presentation, I would like to join my Senate colleagues in congratulating the team from Carifta, who has done a stellar job and made the country very proud. And so I say to them, congratulations. Madam President, I also wish to send condolences to my entire family on the passing of a dear cousin, Lorraine Judith Pickstock. She was laid to rest on the weekend. Madam President, I listened to my Senate colleague across the way, Ms. Barnett Ellis, and I was just curious because it almost seemed as if she's saying that this is not the most progressive legislative agenda that she has ever seen through government. That's what I'm saying. This was an extremely aggressive legislative agenda, And so
Sir,
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Michael Barnett Ellis.
thank you, Madam President. I made no comments in my contribution about their political agenda.
Point of clarification. Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
yeah.
Thank you,
Well-
Senator
Well,
Bixcoff.
I was pointing out the fact she indirectly was saying she looked forward to the passage of these pieces of legislation. I was just merely pointing out, Madam President, that this is perhaps the most active Attorney General that we've seen in a while, Madam President. Senator the Honorable Ryan L. Pinder, the Lion. Yes, and so I merely wanted to point that out so I can sort of put my Senate colleague on notice. Madam President, we are very fond of saying that we are a democratic country of laws. Laws calibrate our society and define our senses of fairness and justice, access, accountability, responsibility, and consequences for running afoul of those laws, Madam President. Societies change as nations develop and people transcend to new policies, pragmatism, realities, and interests. In order for any nation to remain in touch with these senses and sensibilities, there has to be that arena where laws can be reformed and revised. Madam President, that is what we are here discussing today in the Law Reform and Revision Bill of 2022. I commend the Attorney General, the Honorable Attorney General, for his contribution in moving the bill and the time he took to explain to this chamber and the Bahamian people, Madam President. I want to also commend the Office of the Attorney General for the timeliness and preparation we have seen in their legislative drafts and the process from cabinet to the legislature. We come to this place and pass, Madam President, a cavalcade of amendments to existing laws, new bills and acts, and there is a point where these have to be published, not just by Gazette as required by law, but also to become a published part of a compendium of revised statute books, Madam President. The bill today sets up the administration, management, and defines the duties and responsibilities of the commissioners who will serve on this commission. The bill very forcefully drives home the independence of the commissioners and gives them tremendous scope, deportment, and technical and financial support to do their jobs. The bill also makes it very clear that a timely and orderly revision of existing laws and the advice and suggestion of new legislation are the frank and direct incumbencies of the Commission. The revolutionary aspect of the bill, to my mind's eye, is the composition of public officers who may be appointed to serve on the Commission. Madam President, I asked a friend many years ago, before I was even remotely interested in becoming a lawyer, what was meant by the term the common law. And without a hesitation, my friend said, I think it means that it is so simple that any common, ordinary person on the road can read what it's saying and comprehend it, Madam President. In other words, in its most simple form, a layman or untrained person in the law should be able to grasp what the law says when he or she reads it. So for me, it is refreshing, really, Madam President, to see how we have grown to appreciate that we have to widen the playing field and bring new players onto the team in the game or arena of law reform and revision. It should not be exclusive to us lawyers. And Madam President, I just would like to interject there because the Attorney General also made it clear that attorneys will be overseeing this process as well. And I say that just in response to my Senate colleague, Mrs. Barnett Ellis, who also indicated about lawyers being a part of the commission. So this is not a tunnel vision approach that the Attorney General's office is taking. This is a full approach where there will be qualified people who would be overseeing the administration of this process, Madam President. And so just wanted to inject that there because I don't want the public thinking that this is not being monitored and reviewed closely by the Attorney General's office. That is a part of their function. Madam President, there are so many areas in our laws desperate and impatient for review and revision. In some instances, Madam President, we are told that there does not exist statute law to enable some areas of law. I recall a recent high-profile bankruptcy case. The courts here held that there was no statute law to reverse a bankruptcy order on appeal. The matter ended up all the way to the Privy Council for adjudication. I am sure those persons who practice in the family division have so many concerns and anxieties. Recently, Madam President, I watched a news report on a children's home in Grand Bahama. The sadness over the inability of orphans to be adopted by loving foster parents or parents because of existing laws which most think have to be revised. If a single mom has raised successful children on her own, then certainly a single woman or man should be allowed to adopt in this country. You pick up a paper in the real estate section and it says no children allowed. The most egregious aspect of that one is when it says no children or pets allowed. In other words, children are reduced to animals. Why should children be denied shelter under our rent laws, Madam President? Madam President, we talk so much about the environment, and yet most environment laws are ignored or not properly enforced, which is, of course, an area away from the Commission, but they also require review. The law of property, still simmering debate over the quieting of Titles Act. New suggestions of hate laws and laws to specify distinct criminal acts, which seem to be covered under the penal code, but have taken on clearly identifiable characteristics, which may not fit entirely the current definitions. I think there is some effort in that other place now to look at how the aggressive breed of canines known as pit bulls should be handled. Why do we allow persons to take their dogs on the public beach where people are picnicking? I love my pets, but can there be a section for persons who bring along their pets? There is so much work to be done, Madam President. This is a start. The Office of the Attorney General will be well served by a dynamic, proactive, efficient, and culturally Bahamian cognizant commission, which the AG is leading up. Madam President, with that, I support this bill. I thank you.
Thank you for your contribution, Senator the Honorable Darren Pickstock. The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Darren Henfield.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, let me say at the outset, my observations as one of the senior men in this place. Yeah. Having sat in the other place, like a few others here, and sitting here, being privileged to sit here as well, I believe that this is a very good debate that we are experiencing thus far, save and except for one or two things that, one, were completely unnecessary. Completely unnecessary. But Madam President, please indulge me as a very brief presentation. I'd like to extend condolences to the family of Anthony Swain, Reverend Swain from Murphytown, a couple of years my senior, whom we lost a couple of weeks ago. I'd like to extend condolences to his wife, Dr. Swain, and their children, and his wider Swain family from the community of Murphytown. If you know anything about Albuquerque, you know the Swain family is huge. I'd also like to extend condolences, as did my colleague to the right of me, to those victims of crime which is unabated, seemingly in the Bahamas, one for which we must all seek to find a solution. Just before I begin formally, permit me to say also, Madam President, I'm certain my colleague from St. Anne's and the other place meant no ill will against the Law Reform Commissioners. For whatever was said, we all appreciate that they are hard-working people, public servants, who do their best to make this Bahamas the best little country that it can possibly be. I've had opportunity to work near and around them, and they're all quite industrious, quite diligent, and quite focused on the advice and the laws that they bring to the Cabinet of the Bahamas by way of the Attorney General to present on behalf of the human people. And so, Madam President, I'm grateful, privileged to contribute to this debate, which, like every other piece of legislation that we've seen brought here, is touted to change and revolutionize the way things are done in the Bahamas. To set us earth-shattering and measures designed to change life as we know them as we know it in the Bahamas. That's what happens, you know. That's what happens, right? So well, we know how that's been going so far, right? We know how that's been going so far. And so in this case, it is asserted that what we do here today will help to keep us abreast of changes and progress in legislative processes and reform, the Law Reform Commission, and with good news, improving the staff and the Law Reform Commission, I believe, is very, very necessary to the management of the way we develop and create legislation in the Bahamas. We'll modernize the Commission's mandate and update laws through consolidation and so on. So we've had good tutorials on what the Law Reform Commission is and what it does. And so the role of the Law Reform Commission, albeit very briefly, let me say in a nutshell, is broadly stated in Section 6 of the bill. The Commission is charged with the reform and revision of the laws of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas with a view to its systematic development and reform. So the Commission looks at Bahamian legislation which should be policy-driven, compares our disposition with regional international jurisdictions and provisions, and make recommendations to the executive, as indicated by way of the Attorney General, on how we might introduce legislation in the interest of the Bahamian people. So the Commission is, if optimally functioning, constantly review Bahamian law to make changes that lend to the positive furtherance of Bahamian society. And so when we come here to make laws are driven by policies mainly. Policies are intended by any administration. Policies are intended to uplift and make better the lives of the people who sent us here to serve them. And sometimes you hear the stoicism in the community and the public. You feel it yourselves sitting here, if you want to be very honest. Are we hitting the mark that we intend to hit? And we come to office with all of the good intentions of doing the best that we can in our spaces and places to improve lives. But are we really hitting the mark is the question that we must put to ourselves honestly. Are we hitting the mark enough sufficiently that Bahamians might be enjoying their best possible lives? And that's what we come here for. We don't come here to pontificate and and to throw jabs and jibes. Sometimes unnecessary. Sometimes it's necessary, and we do that, right? And so all of this which we agree can be exceptionally dynamic and important, what the commission does, falls within the charge of the commissioner. And I'm very, very pleased to hear the Attorney General state that they're looking at more than one commissioner because the work could be burdensome, could be onerous. And I think it's a very good idea to have someone focused on crime and someone focused on other matters that touch and concern. If necessary, get three, because God knows we need them, right? And get them the staff. Yeah, they are. But we spend a lot of money on stuff, on things, you know, on things, right? On things, yeah. So now, what we come here for as legislators? What do we come here? What do we come here to do? And I'm almost done. Believe it or not, right? Article 52(1) of the Constitution empowers the legislature, which comprises both houses, right? The Senate and the House of Assembly. When people talk about Parliament, they tend to forget from time to time that that includes both houses. Our system is bicameral, right? We sit here by the grace of our leaders. Others sit there by the grace of those who elected them. It's fortunate when people elect you. And you're also fortunate when you're appointed to sit in this place, because it speaks to the confidence that your leaders have in you to perform on behalf of the Bahamian people. You come here to perform on behalf of the Bahamian people. We defend our administrative positions, but we really come here to work on behalf of the Bahamian people, to make laws for the peace, order, and good government of the Bahamas. And so we need to focus. How do we get to that place where we can make better laws? I mean, we know these naughty problems that we've had for years and years now, where we can't get people to trial on time, and so we end up with people on the streets who ought not be on the streets, and we end up with gang wars and wars where people are put in harm's way. We need to focus on how we, you know, is it time for us to reconsider the Privy Council, who says to us that's not the worst of the worst? Is it time for us to look and you know, in answer to the Privy Council, you have the Caribbean Court of Justice, which since Pratt and Morgan hasn't done anything different either. So they you know, I don't know if it's Antigua and Barbuda. I'm not sure which one it is, but I think their final court rests. I don't want to misspeak, so I'm not sure. And perhaps we might come to that place in the Bahamas. Perhaps we would come to the place. I support the death penalty. I can't speak for anybody else. I support the death penalty. I believe, and I say that publicly on my feet in this place. I believe that if you can wantonly kill someone, where you sit in the rain, with your cutlass sharpened or your gun, the sun come and dry you, and you wait there for some victim, and you kill him, it's premeditated murder. And I believe you should pay the price for that. That's my belief. We have to come to a place in this country where we get dead serious and say, look here, no, enough is enough. We're not going to tolerate this anymore. That's our job. Where we can effectively achieve with the help and guidance of a well-resourced and highly functional law reform commission. Let's, you know, government or civil society, but also with the broader community. And this is the point that I wish to make before I rest. One of the things that I've discovered about us who end up in these places, mostly by sheer luck, right, is that as soon as we arrive in these chambers, we all know it. You know, we summon some spirit from another place that says to us, you know, nobody could tell me what to do. I understand and know all things. You know, I heard the Attorney General, who's a fishing aficionado like myself and Minister Halkidas here, we love fishing. Some are better than others, I believe. I believe Minister Alcides has more experience, even though we had some bragging in here today about the tuna. We somehow come to these hollowed halls and believe we know all things, we understand and appreciate all things, but we have very little use to truly hear and listen to the people who sent us here to work in their interest, as if we know better than them the things that they need to survive and exist in this country. Suddenly we know everything about all things, and we develop a low tolerance for opposing points of views. Doesn't have to be political points of views, but any point of view that is not consistent with ours, we tend to very quickly shove aside. Quite frankly, as members of parliament, we should be frequently engaged with constituents relative to the laws that we introduce, which they are expected to abide by. You know, I appreciate that to some extent we consult with sectors of our society with hopes of getting feedback before passing legislation, but there has to be a means of doing more of this, more in this vein. Madam President, Section 6.2A of the bill, which before us, provides for the Commission to receive and consider recommendations or proposals for reform from the Attorney General, from public officials, from holders of judicial office or judicial officers, attorneys, and members of the public. The last one that I'm concerned with, because the others are basically practitioners of the law, and by means of what they do, their livelihood or their existence, they engage with the law more frequently. But that latter segment that is mentioned, the public, how often does the public get an opportunity to really treat with and engage enactments before we bring? And I'm not casting aspersions on any administration. We're all guilty of this. Outside of the public meetings conducted in lieu of perhaps the constitutional referenda, a couple of those exercises which we had, I don't know that we get to have consultations broadly with the communities of our country, all across the country, to let them know, even not necessarily before we pass a law. We can, if we send a bill out for consultation, we can send them to communities where perhaps administrators, local government practitioners, have a guest from the Law Reform Commission or one of us attorneys who would volunteer after being walked through the thing by the Law Reform Commission, right? Yeah, and we need more volunteers. The government simply cannot afford to do all the things that we need to do, but we got to speed it up, you know? We got to speed it up, right? So you can hear, and for you, and for some of you who want to be parliamentarians in that other place, I see a lot of you very ambitious here, right? And it's a good thing. We need you. We need you. You see? So you see all the greenness, right? Right. We need good young politicians who put the national interest of this country above their own personal interest. You know, that's what we need. And so parliamentarians ought to, if they can before a bill is passed, right, go into their communities and speak to their constituents about what the government is proposing to do, right? And have their input, have their voice, so that when we come to this place, we are informed by the voices of our constituents, right? Public meetings examine and explain potential enactments before bringing them to this place. I believe that they are necessary, and I believe that we should empower the Law Reform Commission financially. It's in there, but I believe we should give them the means to be able to do these things, because sometimes the little fella right down there in Grand Key, he might be living something, or the mother down there in Matthew Town, she may be living something that this law fails to take cognizance of, right? Yeah, that's what we come here to do, to assist. We come here to assist policy. That's what we come here for, and perhaps among the many reasons why Bahamians are so jaded and don't have this sense of well, this is about me. It's because they don't feel that buy-in. They don't get that buy-in that is necessary to come from them saying to their friends and their neighbors, no, I understand what the government is seeking to do. And I also understand the voice of the opposition in this. And so here is what I really believe. And you get buy-in from your communities. And so when people appreciate that you can turn right on the red light, it doesn't mean that you could do so indiscriminately, but you have to watch and see what's going on before you do so. We on this side, as is indicated, we support this bill. We support this bill, and we pray that the Attorney General is able, through his good offices, to put into place many of the things which he promised here today that will happen to cause the expediency of legislation in this Bahamas that aids and benefits the Bahamian people. With that, I rest. I thank you.
As many?
I don't know.
The chair
Say
recognizes.
something? Cowboy.
As many? Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Reuben Rami.
Yeah, thank you very much. Wasn't going to make a presentation on this amendment, but it was just some questions, and I hope that the AG will be able to help it to wrap up. And merely from a view of, as we would have spoken, the common man, for him to appreciate the maybe more sort of nuances and the complexity that is wrapped up in this bill. Holistically, the intent of the bill, I think, is sound, because we all have problems with the fact of our laws and keeping track of the law exactly as has been explained by most persons presenting here today. But as we begin to look through it, there are also other consequences and probably unintended consequences. As envisioned here, the Commission has a very interesting task. I think in a sense it almost transcends law. It's almost like physics. Because we know the complexity of the English language in and of itself as a whole. We know for a fact that as our laws are practiced, our definitions and interpretations tend to be drastically influenced by regional influences, decisions made in other places, including interpretations. I remember when the death penalty, the automatic death penalty was stayed. I think, if I'm correct, that was done because they got a definition from a case in Mauritius, where somebody in Mauritius interpreted one particular word that was critical to the understanding of the mandatory death sentence. And that was applied here, and because that was applied here, because it was debated in another jurisdiction and acknowledged, it changed how we did and handled the death penalty. I think speaking with a common man with this, because the intent of this, I think, is really nice. But everything sometimes have a side effect. Let me use this as an example. In the days of telegrams, a young man's wife was in another city and she saw a very expensive piece of jewelry. And she communicated with him via telegram, asking his advice that should she purchase this expensive piece of jewelry. And the young man sent a telegram back, saying, no, price too high. And the telegram officer removed the comma, which should have been no, price too high. And he only sent no, price too high. Where the lady was indeed joyous and spent the money that she had saved and bought the piece of jewelry, the matter went to court, and you could obviously tell who won that. Because the comma was simply misplaced, which changed the whole meaning of what was being said. And we can see that too in law, where shall and a may makes the biggest difference as to the gravity of authority. The and the may, any word could literally impact the whole flow. So the task of reviewing laws is a complex thing, and it's more than just a legal mindset. It's understanding the English and even the common English to be able to ensure that the moving of anything that would have been passed and have to be reviewed, it's almost like walking on eggshells to ensure that that intent as expressed in this bill does not interfere with the meaning of the law in and of itself. With that being in mind, I mean, could you envision that out of necessity of modernizing the law, which is very appropriate, and I'll give you an example I think is very important, Parliament in and of itself could possibly even be inundated with a lot of necessary amendments that may even imply having to move a comma in a certain different place, because just by doing that literally does impact the meaning and the interpretation of the law. And even more so, that has the possibility of also interfering with a government's agenda. Because when we began to review these laws, and you know, many of our laws, and I think I can say many, substantive amount of our laws are so antiquated in and of itself that we can find ourselves by necessity having to make time in the halls of our parliament to make those actual amendments on top of the agenda-driven amendment, which is a necessity for us to progress as a country moving forward and dealing with things immediately. So it could possibly lead to what could be a substantive backlog for that, and in many cases it may not be as simple and cut and dry reviewing these things. I'll give you one example. When we had the emergency orders, I remember correctly that the emergency orders was written so far back and never anticipated airports. It's back where everything is what, ship and land and those other things, because of the times in which it was written. That's a perfect example of something that needed to have been modernized in and of itself. And as was said, and I agree with Senator Pistalk, even with laws as relate to adoptions and everything else, there's just so much to do. So I would have to encourage and I'll give my advice, and I appreciate when you added, I think, the additional possible four commissioners. I see that possibly expanding because of the gravity of what needs to be done. And you're on the right wicket with specialties. I think that was very wise, because you need that, because every category is in itself a substantive category, and somebody must have not only the skill set, but the staffing to focus on that, so we don't end up with a big pool. As you relate to this too, Mr. Attorney General, and you could give your comment for the benefit of those. In some instances, whereas the law would have been already enacted and applied and adjudicated, and persons who would have failed under those laws that would have passed, they can't be victims, they failed under the law, it was passed as a law. And there seemed to be a need by the Commission for an amendment in that law for whatever reason that requires the law to even have to go to Parliament for those amendments, because the authority doesn't give them to amend something that substantially changes the meaning of the law. But they do recognize the error in that law in and of itself. I know it is the burden of any good lawyer to say, okay, something happened, go back to this client that may be incarcerated, would have lost money, and try to do that. But there's anything that the system itself can do in terms of tracking, again, in the legal system, that's your lawyer problem. But of fairness to be able to track so that persons now who would have lost a case under this law that they found to be in error and is now corrected, now becomes a victim of something of which he was properly adjudicated against, if you follow what I'm saying. How do we ensure that there is equity in law on behalf of the persons from the point of the state? Even again, I refuse to, and I know that it is the burden of the lawyer to keep tabs of these things, but in some instances, persons would have certain amount of time would have elapsed. Because in the point that was made in the bill as to relate to the retroactivity, it is retroactive, I believe, from the time that the law itself or that order would have been passed. And you can get some clarification on that for me. Yeah.
Come into
And,
force
and,
1st
and
of May.
yeah, yeah. So we want to do that because going forward, this commission would be in place and those things need to be done. Now, also, there seems to, and I won't get into it in details because it's just a short thing. When I looked into section 23 and 24, even as relate to the omissions and as relate to the authorities of the commission, which said shall, there seemed to be, and I'll use the term, a placental line. And the reason why I say that, because of a baby in a womb, there's a thin point where the placenta stops the blood from the mother transferring to the child, but the child gets oxygen and food from the mother. I'm saying there's a very, very thin line. In there, I see such a thin line between the operation of the shalls in the commission and in the sections as relate to the omission. I think you can see that's close. I can see it there, but it seemed to be so close. It seemed to be so close in there that in a sense it almost seemed to neutralize certain elements of what would have been said in here as it relates to the capacity of the commission. So with that, if the Attorney General can just, in his wrap-up, just for the sake of the general public, on any of those points he deemed necessary to respond to give us an idea as it relate to those things. So in short, it is the fact that it can possibly have, hey, but that's the job, eh? We face things. Impact on the government's agenda, because of a lot of things do come up, you gotta push them forward. And you know, even I think virtually every government don't get to complete their agenda. I've seen that looking at the agendas out there, because things move around, priorities come up, et cetera, and so how we can be able to address those things. With that, I rest.
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Ryan Pinder.
For the wrap-up?
Yeah.
Thank you. No, I don't need that. Thank you. I want to, as a wrap-up, I want to certainly thank all of our colleagues around the table. I want to thank the opposition for some well-reasoned contributions to this, and my colleagues around the table here on their recognition. I found this a much more civil debate than in the lower chamber, so I appreciate that. Yeah. There were a few things brought up in the contributions I think are worthy of speaking to. I think my good friend over here spoke a lot about aged legislation, and legislation that was, in some instances, I think she said 140 years old, that needs to be addressed. And this is part and parcel of the purpose of why we're modernizing this, is to be able to bring some structure institutionally to the review and preparation of legislation. And so these things, and I want to thank you about offering up the private bar on a volunteer basis to assist. I'm going to ask my friend to help me on a couple of these bills to do that. I think that your point is very much taken on the issue of consultation. And you know, that's a difficult line, because we're an archipelagic country, and going to settlements on all pieces of legislation is practically impossible, right? But there are, to your point, digital forms of consultation and explanation should be adopted. And you know, we have a provision, as I said, in the bill that now causes the commissioner to do a more robust report and description on especially major pieces of reform. And so we'll take your point and certainly integrate that and maybe come up with a plan for kind of a digital explanation for all of the citizenry who would be inclined to understand what we're doing in these places. I think my good colleague with the bright orange tie, orange is my favorite color, so thank you. And if we match our ties, we're actually Miami Dolphins. Even better. Yeah. But you raised certainly issues about inadvertent errors in legislation, and part of the substantial new provisions here deal with that in our sections 22 and sections 24, where, and I'll give you an example, all right? And I'm foreshadowing an amendment that's going to be coming to this place. But there's a bill out there that, due to a Scrivener's error, put and or instead of and, right? And now that has had a consequential effect financially that needs to be remedied, right? And if you look at what we call the legislative history of that bill, where there were reports and analyses that influenced what the language is in that bill, you would see that it is clearly a Scrivener's error and is not what the intent was of the drafters at the time. There is a consequence to that now, that one we need to your point, we need to honor the consequence for the period in which it was passed until the period is going to be amended. And then after that, the people will be treated differently, right? And that's a Scrivener's error. And with that bill, that could have been remedied utilizing Section 22 and 24 of the bill, whereby, one, we don't have to come here to fix a Scrivener's error, but secondly, it could have been addressed at the earliest possible opportunity by a stroke of the pen. And as a follow-up to that, you raised the questions about shall and may within this bill. And that's the importance of having shall, because at the time an error of that intent it would be found, it is an obligation to fix it at the earliest possible time, rather than be a permissive thing or may happen down the line. On viewing the error, it shall be fixed, and that's what this legislation provides. So I think I thank you for your contribution, because that's something important, I think, to do. You speak about how do you rectify these types of issues when there is that error in between. And certainly on the civil side or the non-criminal side, that's a difficult thing to do. On the criminal side, you can always expunge records, right? You always have and it doesn't completely fix the issue, but it certainly fixes the issue as much as permissible. But on the civil side or the non-criminal side, it's a very difficult thing, because now we are going to have to compensate these individuals due to the Scrivener's error, and then not compensate future individuals once we change it, and there's going to be a clear discrepancy in that. And so that is inherently a difficult thing. I'm hoping these provisions that obligate fixing these errors, we're all human and there are errors in this, now will at least rectify this situation a lot sooner than it would otherwise, when you stumble across it and say, oh, I caught this error. We only caught the error because somebody is trying to take advantage of the error, and it shouldn't be there. So those, I think, are provisions in the bill that address some of the commentary here. With that, Madam President, I so move for the second reading of this bill.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act to repeal and replace the Law Reform and Revision Act, and to modernize the law for reforming, revising, and consolidating the laws of the Bahamas and for concerned purposes. As many are in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. The motion is carried. Order the bill be read a second time and committed.
A bill for an act to repeal and replace the Law, Reform and Revision Act, and to modernize the law for reforming, revising, and consolidating the laws of the Bahamas and for connected purposes.
For the second reading,
And none, Madam President.
Committee of the Whole.
Madam President, I move that the Senate do resolve itself into a committee of the whole with the Vice President in the chair.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the Senate do now resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole with the Vice President and Chairman of the Committee of the Whole in the chair, As many as in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The motion is carried.
Committee of the Whole.
Mr. Chairman, with respect to the law reform, a bill for an act to repeal and replace the Law Reform and Revision Act and to modernize the law for reforming, revising, and consolidating the laws of the Bahamas and for connected purposes, I move that the long title be agreed.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the long title of the bill be agreed. As many are in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those who oppose say nay. The motion is agreed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that the short title be agreed.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the short title of the bill be agreed. As many are in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those who oppose say nay. The short title is agreed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that clauses 2 to 33 be agreed.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that clauses 2 through 33 of the bill be agreed. As many are in favor say aye. Aye. Those who oppose say nay. The motion is agreed. The motion is carried. Clauses 2 through 33 of the bill are agreed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that the bill be now agreed in its entirety.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill in its entirety be agreed. As many are in favor say aye. Aye. Those who oppose say nay. The motion is agreed. The bill is agreed in its entirety.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that the President do now take the chair.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the President do now take the chair. As many are in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those who oppose say nay. The motion is carried. Madam President will now take the chair. Madam President, I beg leave to report that the Committee of the Whole has examined the bill, having made no amendment thereto.
Honorable members, the Vice President and Chairman of the Committee of the Whole has reported that the committee has examined the bill hereto, having made no amendments. Third reading and passing of bills.
Madam President, I move for third reading and passing of the bill for an act to repeal and replace the Law Reform and Revision Act and to modernize the law for reforming, revising, and consolidating the laws of the Bahamas and for connected purposes.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a third time and passed. As many as in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion is carried. Order that the bill be read a third time and passed.
A bill for an act to repeal and replace the Law, Reform and Revision Act and to modernize the law for reforming, revising, and consolidating the laws of the Bahamas and for connected purposes.
Order that this bill do now pass and the title thereof declared to be the Law Reform and Revisions Act 2023. For the third reading of bills,
There are none, Madam President.
consideration of House amendments, resolutions, discharge of select committees, notice of future meetings.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I wish to give notice that at the next sitting of the Senate, I will move I will just want to give notice of the following resolutions. Whereas the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is a member of the United Nations that seeks to promote uniformity in the implementation, protection, and enforcement of human rights. And whereas the United Nations has also established mechanisms to promote and protect these rights and to assist states in carrying out their responsibilities. And whereas the Parliament of the Bahamas plays a critical role in the country's compliance with its human rights obligations on the international and regional levels. And whereas Parliament is desirous of constituting a committee to comprise of 8 members of Parliament, 5 members of the House of Assembly, and 3 members of the Senate to be responsible for monitoring the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas, now be it therefore resolved that this House approves the constitution of a committee of 3 members of Parliament to monitor the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas, and be it further resolved that the terms of reference of the committee are as follows: to assess and evaluate all matters related to the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas, to determine the level at which such rights are in compliance with regional and global obligations, to report to Parliament every 6 months on human rights matters, to make recommendations to guide the legislative process to improve human rights in the Bahamas, to investigate alleged human rights violations through parliamentary inquiries, holding public hearings on human rights related issues with power to send for persons and papers, and with leave to sit from place to place, and with leave to sit during the recess.
Order that the document be brought up, or the document do lie on the table.
Further notices.
Further notices of future meetings.
Yes, Madam President, I wish to give notice of the following resolution. Whereas the Interparliamentary Union, the IPU, is a body that seeks to promote peace and security, democracy and human rights, the rule of law, and sustainable development. And whereas the Interparliamentary Union is recognized as the global organization of national parliaments, which clearly attests to the willingness of nations to build strong ties of interparliamentary dialogue and cooperation with a view to better meeting the needs and expectations of citizens for a safer and more equitable world. And whereas the Parliament of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas recognizes that interparliamentary contacts and cooperation can help strengthen the institution and lead to stronger engagement at the regional and international levels. And whereas the Parliament of the Bahamas is desirous of requesting membership of the IPU, and whereas the Parliament is making application for membership, and whereas the Parliament, in making application for membership, has to decide on a number of administrative arrangements for its participation as a member, hereby proposes to constitute a committee comprising of 5 persons to have responsibility for organization of relations and activities of the Parliament with the IPU. And whereas Parliament may make guidelines on how it will function as an IPU member, now therefore be it resolved that this House approves Parliament being a member of the Interparliamentary Union, approves the constitution of a committee comprising 5 persons to have responsibility for organization of the relations and activities of Parliament with the Interparliamentary Union, and C, approves the making of guidelines by Parliament on how it will function as a member of the Interparliamentary Union.
Order that the document brought up, or that the document do lie on the table. Further notices of future meetings.
Madam President, I just wish to renew all notices standing in the name of the government.
Orders for the clerk. Adjournment.
Madam President, I move we intend to adjourn until Thursday, the 27th of when the final is named, of September. I'm sorry, of April. Thursday the 27th. Thursday the 27th of April at 10 a.m. Thursday the 27th of April at 10 a.m., at which time we propose to debate the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill. And so, Madam President, I move that the Senate at its rising do adjourn until Thursday, 27th of April, 2023.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
Final adjournment?
Madam President, thank you. Just before the final adjournment, Madam President, I want to take this opportunity to extend condolences to the Ellis family in Bimini, especially my pastor, former pastor, but spiritual leader, Bishop Neil Ellis, and the entire Ellis family and those affected in Bimini. I also want to take this opportunity, Madam President, and extend my condolences, this being the first time that we've been in this place since it, but one of my former mentors, Ambassador Ed Bethel, on his passing, he was always a friend and one who encouraged me during my time in the diplomatic corps. And so I want to extend to his wife and his kids my condolences on his passing as well. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Madam President, I move that the Senate do now adjourn.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the Senate do now adjourn until the 27th of April, 2023. Is there a seconder? Those who are in favor say aye. Opposed say nay. The motion is carried. The Senate stands adjourned to the 27th of April, 2023.
Honorable members, at the break, we were debating the central bank bill. I presume we are now ready. As many? The chair recognizes the honorable member for South and Central Andros.
Good afternoon, Madam Speaker. I'm grateful and privileged to always rise in this great house and represent the resilient people of Mangrove Key, Central, and South Andros to give my contribution to the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill 2023, which aims to amend the previous act of 2020. Whereas The previous act provided clearly defined objectives for the central bank, along with the necessary authority to achieve those objectives. This amendment seeks to expand the function of the central bank through its management of external reserves and maintenance of financial stability. Madam Speaker, the most significant clause in the amendments to this bill is to make provisions for the access and use of special drawing rights by the government. The international reserve asset that is called the special drawing rights, or SDR, as allocated by the International Monetary Fund, is an interest-bearing tool used to supplement other reserve assets of member countries. Madam Speaker, the Central Bank of the Bahamas plays a critical role in economic management, particularly balance and payment stability, and the preservation of the value of the Bahamian currency. Over time, monetary policy tools must be defined in keeping with changes in the domestic sector, focusing in this instance on credit controls and liquidity management. International reserves are similar to large national savings accounts in foreign currencies, managed by our central bank, that ensure that a country has the foreign currencies it needs to operate in a global market. Madam Speaker, SDRs are a reserve asset originally created to help IMF member countries face balance of payment crises. Adding SDRs to a country's international reserves makes it more resilient financially, and in time of crises, our government can dip into its savings for priority needs. They can also use, Madam Speaker, their SDRs in a range of operations with other countries or to settle financial obligations to the fund. Since the start of the pandemic, the IMF has already mobilized $15 billion in SDRs, voluntarily pledged by some members that can be lent to some countries at zero interest rate. Madam Speaker, it is important that the Bahamian people are cognizant of the fact that an SDR allocation is cost-free. It is a unit of account and not currency in the way the average person considers. SDRs are a reserved asset, not foreign aid. They have two characteristics that make them special and extremely valuable at a time of crisis. Madam Speaker, they create no debt in the recipient's country, and they come with no conditionality. As this New Day government continues to formulate strategies and make laws and policies that strengthen our revenue collection, we recognize that the servicing of our national debt absorbs budgetary and foreign exchange resources. Madam Speaker, since this is not a favorable option for any country's strategic development plan, this Davis administration is favorably positioned to utilize the SDRs without the need to borrow at high interest rates or run current account surpluses at the detriment of economic growth. These SDRs, Madam Speaker, are not representative of any loan by the government. Once allocated, members can hold their SDRs as part of their foreign exchange reserves or use part or all of their SDR allocations. IMF members can also use SDRs in a range of other authorized operations, among themselves, like payment of obligations, and in operations and transactions involving the IMF, such as the payment of interest on and repayment of loans also, Madam Speaker. According to the IMF, in its publications, press releases, and general information, I quote, "The special drawing right, or SDR allocation, is not a loan from the IMF. When the IMF allocates SDRs, participants in the SDR department receive unconditional liquidity represented by an interest-bearing reserve asset, or SDR holding," end quote. Therefore, Madam Speaker, we must be cautious in the manner by which financial information is relayed to the Bahamian public. The creation of confusion and skepticism about the government's decision to utilize the SDRs provided by the IMF is damaging in otherwise advantageous opportunities. Madam Speaker, this New Day government made it clear in its blueprint for change that national decisions would be made for the benefit of our people and all of the country. One would assume that an announcement such as this would be cause for relief in our mandate to lower the national debt to GDP while in recovery from Hurricane Dorian and the pandemic. Nevertheless, this Davis-Cooper administration recognizes the urge to challenge and criticize every decision made. However, Madam Speaker, we teach our children. So let us present the facts and not assumptions or misunderstandings. Madam Speaker, the central bank has a functional role of promotion and maintenance of an adequate banking system throughout the country. In the beginning of my speech, I said the resilient people of Andros. Here is one of the reasons why. It must be noted, Madam Speaker, that for the people of Andros, this role of the central bank is substantially lacking. For context, in Mangrove Key, only 2 days out of the week are allocated for banking services. The same applies to South Andros, where twice a week, residents can access face-to-face financial services during the hours of 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., unless residents choose to utilize a telemachine that doesn't offer full service. Central Andros, along with North Andros, have no banking facilities. There is the Loan Credit Union in Central Andros, to be fair. However, it cannot legally operate as a bank, and therefore, the people are left to find unique and creative ways to house their resources until they can travel to the capital to access a physical banking facility. One of the country's known commercial banks operates the loan teller machine in North Andros. But for the residents in Central Andros, there is uncertainty in traveling all the way up there in the north to discover that there is no money available in the machine, or, as in the case just a few days ago, the machine is inoperable. If the duty, Madam Speaker, of the Central Bank of the Bahamas is to provide conditions conducive to the orderly development of the country and the economy, it is imperative that specific plans and objectives be implemented for Andros sooner rather than later. Madam Speaker, as we present the amendments to the Central Bank Bill, and as I speak on behalf of the people in Andros, I wish to make mention for further reasons why the implementation of fully functioning banking facilities is paramount. Over the Easter weekend, there was a coconut festival down in Little Creek, South Andros. This past weekend, Madam Speaker, we had the Fish Fry Festival in Bearing Point, Central Andros. The All Andros Sailing Regatta is in its final preparation as the teams and sailors set to compete for the spaces to represent Andros in the upcoming Bahamas Games. On Mother's Day weekend, Mangrove Key will host its homecoming and regatta. And on the 2nd of June through the 4th, South Andros will host its homecoming and regatta with a special welcome concert that is free for all and features some great Bahamian artists and a special guest artist. Later on that month in June, Madam Speaker, the Crab Fest in Central Andros promises to be historic and unforgettable. These are just some of the things going on in my district that shows the economic movement is going on, where a banking facility is not a want, but a need, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we know that we are less than 12 weeks to our 50th anniversary of independence. I wish to highlight the industrious and entrepreneurial spirit of our Bahamian people by showcasing this straw portfolio made by Miss Angela Rowe down there in South Andros.
Very nice.
I'll make sure I tell her leave the name on it also. Madam Speaker, this portfolio was handcrafted, a feat that many of the international and luxury designer stores and makers cannot share that same sentiment. I choose to highlight this work and mention that as a reminder that our people are gifted, and on any given day, we can show the world that our products are high caliber and high quality. I know that Harrods in London will be showcasing many of our locally designed products this summer, which is an achievement we can all share a national pride in. In closing, Madam Speaker, my wish is for the ongoing progress of our nation, our institutions, and our people. In a forward-moving society, we should push for advances in our financial systems. However, that advancement ought not to come at the expense of our smaller communities and family of violence. Madam Speaker, before I take my seat, I want to spend a special happy birthday to Mr. It Is Well, Pastor James W. Pratt, down in Congo Town, South Andres, and also to say happy birthday to my youngest daughter, Lauren, who will be celebrating her 16th birthday. And because of the great member for Angliston and Yamacraw, she'll be having a much anticipated birthday party that is really going to be full of surprises for her. As we fully support this bill for an amendment to the Central Bank Bill, we look forward to the day when more support is given to the people of Mangrove Key, North, Central, and South Andres. We support this bill, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Asmini? The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for St. Anne's. Yeah. Just waiting on his time.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for this opportunity to give a contribution on behalf of the constituents of St. Anne's on the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill. The public knows what happened in December, and the public knows why we're here today. Bottom line is we're doing something to clear their past conduct, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when you look up the word toter in the dictionary, it should say PLP. The PLPs are toters. They love a party and they feel entitled to take what is not theirs. They took the people's money to fly to Bermuda so they could party. And they took the central bank SDR money so they could party. Details on actual ownership and authority to take mean nothing
The chair
to them.
recognizes the Honorable Member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini.
Mr. Speaker, we've allowed latitude in this debate for members, but I think the member now is going overboard. The Progressive Liberal Party, the government of the Bahamas today, does not utilize the people's money for party. Whatever work is done is on and for the Bahamian people. And what we're debating today is the central bank bill, the amendments, and all that was received from the IMF money was used for and is being used for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and the benefit of the Bahamian people. So please, let us not trivialize such an important debate.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
We stole the money.
Yeah.
That's what we said. We stole the money.
The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Kalani.
Madam Speaker, I think the member only just trying to show a comparison in that the Central Bank Act was violated, and the member is showing that the trip to Bermuda was likewise violated. And that's all he's trying to explain.
The member is accusing the government of stealing,
No, he didn't say that.
right?
He did.
So I want to make sure, Madam Speaker, that we understand what we're talking about in this debate and the misrepresentation. The government of the Bahamas utilizes the means of our country in the interest of the people of our country. And that has been explained, was explained earlier by Cat Island.
Yes,
And there's no doubt about it, Madam Speaker.
thank you. Honourable Kalani?
Correct, Madam Speaker. At no point did the member accuse the government of stealing. The member is only talking about misappropriation, not misappropriation, mismanagement, in that the monies for central bank the law was not followed. And he's also pointing out the monies of the Bermuda trip, the laws were not followed, or the policy of
Member,
procedure.
are we willing to change the word toting?
Take what in yours.
Yes.
Madam Speaker, I have 8 pages of this. Okay, so I'm not going to be able to change what I've prepared for my debate contribution today.
Okay. It'll be stricken, the word toting will be stricken from the record.
That's the easiest of the words that I have in here, Madam Speaker.
Yes, took. Took.
No, she said the word told.
Toting.
They took the money. They took the money. Who took money? Who took money? Who?
Took the money to party. Took the money to party, is that what he said?
Took the money to party. That means
Oh, no.
took the money to party. That's what was said. Took the money to party.
That'll be stricken from the record as well.
Corporate soul.
Honourable members, let's remember at the end of the day, after this stint we call politics, people's reputation and the integrity of the offices that we hold as in this political organization, we can't call each other these kind of vile names. So let's remember, at the end of the day, when we walk on those doors, one day you're not going to be here. So we don't need the public perception to be that only thieves and bandits sit in this place. So let's be very careful of our language here. Thank you, Honourable Member. You may proceed.
Madam Speaker, the member for St. Anne's does not support this bill.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
That's all y'all can handle.
As many?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the management of the economy of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas